Do you play cane or synthetic reeds? And if you do play synthetic reeds, is that simply because you got sick of messing around with those reeds and the lack of consistency and maybe longevity? Well, in this video, we're going to have a look at my 2 top tips for getting the most out of your cane reeds. So let's get into it. Now, when you want to get into some good practice, the last thing you want to be doing is messing around with inconsistent reeds. And this is, I think, one of the main reasons why a lot of people are moving across to synthetic reeds. They've come on a lot in the last 10-15 years. I remember the first ones were a bit like playing old drain pipes, but these days they're very, very close to cane. But for me, and maybe for some of you out there, there's still something not quite the same as playing a good cane reed. However, on the other side of things, cane reeds can be incredibly inconsistent. They often take a lot of maintenance, and sometimes they just don't last for very long. So let's have a talk about some ways we can get our cane reeds to just behave a bit more like synthetic reeds. So I mean this from the point of view of the way they play, their consistency, and their longevity. Now, we've all had problems with cane reeds, and some people go down the route of cutting and shaving and messing around with those reeds. To me, that seems like a step too far. I want to be spending that time practicing or, getting to grips with the instrument. Not messing around with the reed. And also it takes a lot of skill to do that right. You can end up wrecking more reeds than you fix. Ultimately, this isn't something I could do midway through a gig either. I've been a professional saxophonist for over 30 years, and there's nothing worse than that gig's coming up and suddenly, maybe even on the gig, something goes wrong with the reed and you've got to start that process all over again. Now, about 15 years ago, I got so frustrated with cane reeds and there was no synthetic alternatives around at that point, I decided to do a series of experiments just to see if I could find a way of making them a bit more consistent and also just trying to get a bit more longevity out of those good ones. So I tried keeping them submerged in water, green tea, all sorts of things. After many searches on the internet, just seeing what everyone had tried out and what people recommended, I tried them all with not a lot of success. But that led me on to yet another forum where they were talking about keeping it in Listerine. And I thought this was really interesting. Now, in the US, the Listerine has alcohol in it. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. Alcohol, I've not tried that. And I just happened to have a bottle of vodka in the cupboard, so I decided to try soaking the reeds in vodka, and I'm still doing that till this day, and I'm going to explain to you why I think it works so well and the kind of process I go through to prepare my reeds for this kind of treatment. By the way, if you like that backing track that I'm practicing along with in this video, you can download it in Sax School. There's still a 14-day free trial and there's thousands of videos in there to really get you going with your practice and all things saxophone. Now, you may have seen some other videos of people trying out soaking their reeds in vodka and they weren't too successful, but they were actually doing it wrong, it turns out. So the key thing is what we're basically going to do with the reed is we're going to pickle it for life. It's not a case of just putting it in some vodka, leaving it for 5 minutes and then suddenly it's a miracle cure and the reed is the perfect reed. No, you've got to keep it in there forever. It lives in the vodka. So I'm going to talk through my process for this. So the first thing I do is I do actually use a tool, and I use the Reed Geek, but you can also use the glass plates or some very light sandpaper if you're careful. And it's to make sure that while the reed's dry, that the base of the reed is completely flat. So when it goes onto your mouthpiece, it creates a good seal. Now it turns out this is the problem with a lot of cane reeds. They're just not flat, and that seal's not being created. So that's the first thing I do. I actually use the Reed Geek tool, which is great for this. I literally take the reed, and from midway down, I just very lightly hold the weight of the tool on it on a sharp edge, and I rub it down several times. And what you'll find is you get a little bit of wood sediment on there. Do it again, you'll get even less. Do it again, and eventually there'll be barely anything there, and at least you know that that part of the reed is now flat and ready to put in the vodka. So the next thing I do before I put the reed in is I mark it, and I mark it at the stock end of the reed. Now I've tried a few different pens with this. Obviously you're about to put it in liquid and you don't want it running everywhere, and the only pen I found that actually doesn't do that and run is a Sharpie. I've tried lots of other brands, and I'm not sponsored by Sharpie, but Sharpie seems to be the only type of pen that doesn't run. And I put a little marking on there. It could be a shape or just a number or something like that before I put it in the vodka. Now, I always put my reeds in the vodka with the tip downwards. Vodka's thicker than water, and you'll see even when you pop it in that it kind of almost slows down as it reaches the bottom. And the reason for this is A, I've never caused any damage to a reed by doing this, and B, when you take it out, you don't want to be grabbing the tip of the reed. Now, it's really important to find a good container, and almost this is the hardest part of doing this. It's finding a good airtight container that the vodka doesn't drip out of when you fasten it, and also maybe that it's made of plastic. Food grade plastic is what you're going to be looking for. If you use glass, obviously, and you're carrying it in your case, maybe that's not a good idea. We don't want smashed glass in our case. So a good plastic container, and I find pill bottles or vitamin tablet bottles to be quite good for this, and they come in lots of different sizes depending on how many reeds you want to keep in there, or whether maybe you play a baritone with a longer reed, or maybe a soprano with a shorter reed. I've just got this vitamin container here, and you can see round it I've just put a big O-ring or an elastic band, and I've got a pair of tweezers which helps me very delicately pull the reed out of the vodka when I need to, rather than dipping my fingers in and fiddling about. Now, before playing any of the reeds that I put in the vodka, I leave them there not for 5 minutes, as been tested on other channels, but I leave them in there for a good 48 hours before I even try playing them. I want them to really almost infuse with that vodka and just get it right into the heart of the reed and just get them submerged and really soaking it all up first of all. I also try to have at least 5 reeds in there if I can, and a great idea is to try and rotate round them. This is exactly why I mark them with that Sharpie, so I know what I'm up to and I can rotate round those reeds. You may not want to do that. You may just have a favourite, in which case at least if you've marked them you know which one that is, so you can just get it out efficiently and get on with your practice. And that's it. That's all I do with my reeds. Now let's talk about the benefits that I've found from doing this. Now, if you've ever done a bit of DIY and you've started off with some untreated wood that you need to paint, what you may have noticed is when you start painting it, it literally sucks in that paint and it's almost like you've not painted it. And what you need to do is you need to seal the pores of the wood. And the way you do that is you use alcohol. Now, you'll see people that are really into kind of using tools with the reeds and reed rushes and things like that. That's almost what they're trying to do. They're trying to get some moisture in the reed, generally by playing it or giving it a brief soak in water. And then they use something like a reed rush to try and close the pores on the reed and trap it in the inside of the reed so it's nice and malleable for playing. The vodka does this for us. It's already infused with the vodka, and it's also self-sealing. The vodka's closing those pores on that reed. So that's point one. Now the next thing is a really useful thing. It's hygiene. It's a really hygienic way to store your reeds, because any bacteria or anything like that that's on that reed, if you put it down somewhere or just from your mouth, then that's not going to be there anymore once it's been soaked in vodka for a little while. So it's a really hygienic way of treating your reeds. Now, one of the reasons that cane reeds deteriorate over the time and go softer to the point where they're just not the same reed and we don't want to play them anymore is actually the enzymes in our saliva are there to break down food. And when you play your saxophone, there's obviously saliva involved, and those enzymes end up on your reed. And when you take it off and you put it in your case or wherever you store it, they continue to eat away at the reed and they break down the wood fibres, and this is why our reeds get softer and softer over time. And what's great about the vodka, once again, is it kills those enzymes. So much so that I've had reeds, and I don't play a strong reed, I play a 2 reed with a 7-star Otto Link mouthpiece on tenor, but I've had reeds that have lasted me well over 3 years, and there's been little to no change in the strength of that reed over the time. They may have got a little bit softer, but that's just general friction and wear, but not significantly and not enough for me to want to change the reed. In fact, since I've been keeping my reeds in vodka, the only time I've ever had to get rid of one of these reeds is when I've broken it myself. I've caught it on a jumper or stabbed it into a wall and I've actually damaged the reed. I've never actually ended up with one of these reeds where it's not been good enough to play anymore, which is really interesting and begs the question, if I hadn't have damaged these reeds, would they have lasted even longer? And this is great because that's even longer than the synthetic reeds, and they just last me for a really, really long time, and I do a lot of playing on a daily basis. When it comes to getting the reed out ready to play, then literally I use my tweezers and I get out the reed from the pot, and I tend to have a nice lint-free cloth, and I just wipe down the kind of stock flat end of the reed that's going to go against the mouthpiece. But because it's alcohol, even if you just hold it for kind of 30 seconds, it'll evaporate off it. And what you're left with is a reed that feels like a normal cane reed that's been started from dry, that you've just played for kind of 30 minutes, and it's that kind of moisture that's left, but on the outside it looks quite dry. So if you want to speed that process up, no problem. Just give it a little gentle dry, particularly at the stock end where it's going against the mouthpiece, and stick it straight on and you're good to go. Now, I've talked about keeping your reeds in vodka, but you can use other types of alcohol as well. I've had plenty of students and professionals that use gin, some that use brandy, some that use whiskey. Basically, the one thing to be aware of is you don't want an alcohol that's got a lot of sugar in it. Sugar's not very good for the cane, so you just want something with a high alcohol content that's not too sugary. So are there any downsides to keeping your reeds in vodka? Not particularly. It's a little bit more fiddly. It takes a little bit more effort when you first set up to get the reed out of the vodka and give it a dry and get it set up, but I think it's completely worth it for the longevity and the consistency that this method gives you. It saves you time in the long run. And the other thing that I would say with this is, once you've committed that reed to vodka, it really needs to stay in the vodka. So if you like leaving the reed on your mouthpiece, which I wouldn't advise anyway, in between practice sessions, then this probably won't work out very well for you, because when it fully dries out and it's not been played for maybe half an hour, 40 minutes, it goes very, very dry and very brittle, and you'll get a lot of warping. Now, it's not the end of the world if you do this by mistake now and again. You just put it back in the vodka, leave it for 48 hours, and it'll be back as good as new. But something to be aware of. And even if I'm on a gig, let's say I'm doing 2 45-minute sets and we've got a short half an hour break, I always put my reed back in the vodka for the break so it stays nice and supple and ready to play. So what do we need? We need a good container to keep our reeds in. We need a bottle of alcohol, vodka, gin, brandy, whiskey, anything you fancy from that point of view. It's good to have an elastic band around it to put your tweezers on, and it's good to have a pair of tweezers to help you get those reeds out. I'd always advise making sure you get a vessel that you can fill up to the top so the reed is completely submerged. If you've got half of the reed in air and half of it in liquid, it might bend because they're two different kind of atmospheres, if you like, from that degree, and one will be dry and one will be wet. So I always try and make sure my reeds are completely submerged in the bottle that I keep them in, and that's important because if you put them in your sax case and lay them on the side, you might have some that end up not in there at all, and you want them completely submerged as much as possible. So I keep them full up, and then a lint-free cloth just to give them a wipe down if I want to do that. And I tend to just keep them all in a sealed plastic bag, and I wrap them up and I stick them in my sax case, and that's it. And I get to the gig and get out the reed and it's ready to play straight away. No breaking time, exactly the same as last time I played it, and good to go. So once again, if you want to grab that little funky practice backing track that I've been using during this video, then head over to Sax School. Also with this video, you'll find that I've done a list of all the bits and bats that I use for this vodka reed method, and you can download that too. So let me know in the comments what you use and how you store your reeds, and maybe you've got some other methods that have worked really well for your cane reeds too. So until next time, take care, and I'll see you then. Bye bye.